At midnight, my son called me, his voice shaking. "Dad, don't turn on the lights. Go to the shed behind this garden now, and don't let anyone know I called." I thought he was in danger. But minutes later, through a crack in the dark shed wall, I saw a stranger slip into my house, moving carefully like a thief. Then another voice rose from somewhere inside that darkness, a voice so familiar I had heard it nearly every day beneath my own roof. And that was when I understood this was not a break-in. It was betrayal. But what this story leaves behind, I hope stays with you. I used to sleep soundly in this house. 51 years, and this place on Heathermore Drive never once handed me a reason to feel afraid. Dorothea used to say that a house draws in all the love poured into it, that the walls hold a kind of memory. She said it the way people say things they know to be true, without needing proof. I believed her then. I still did right up until the night everything changed. Welcome back to Father's Silent Revenge. I'm glad you're here with me today. If this is your first time, take a moment and subscribe, so the next story finds its way to you. Before we go any further, I'd love to know right now, at this point in the story, who are you rooting for the most, and why? Drop it in the comments below. A quick note, some elements of this story have been shaped for the purpose of audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real persons or events is coincidental. What matters most is the truth at the heart of it. I still do. What I had not reckoned with was the possibility that a house could absorb betrayal just as quietly, with no one the wiser. That Tuesday night in September, I lay on my side of the bed, always my side, never hers. Not once in 18 months had I managed to sleep in the center. I lay there watching the ceiling fan turn slow in the dark, that hollow ache sitting in my chest, the way it always did after midnight. The kind no doctor can name, because it has nothing to do with the muscle itself and everything to do with the person who used to sleep 3 inches away. Then the phone lit up the nightstand like a flare. My hand shot out before the second ring. Midnight calls only ever mean one thing, and my body understood it before my mind could catch up. "Cormac, Dad." His voice landed like a fist, low compressed, scraped raw around the edges. Not the voice of a man who had misdialed. The voice of a man working very hard to keep himself from coming apart. Dad listened to me carefully. "Are you alone?" My spine went rigid. "I'm in bed." "What's happening? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt, but I need you to do exactly what I say. And I need you to do it right now." A sharp breath. "Don't turn on any lights, not one. Get up. Go downstairs through the kitchen and out the back door to the storage shed behind the garden, the wooden one near the back fence. Go inside and throw the bolt." I swung my legs over the side of the bed, heart hammering hard enough to feel it in my throat. "Cormac, you're scaring me." "Tell me what, Dad?" His voice dropped to something barely a breath, and what I caught underneath it made the hair on my arms stand straight up. "Please don't ask me right now. Just go. And whatever you do, don't let Brendan or Celeste know I called." The line went dead. I sat on the edge of the bed, with the phone pressed to my sternum, my pulse thundering through the room, suddenly feeling 3 degrees colder than it had a moment before. Every instinct said call him back. But the quieter instinct, the one that lives behind the ribs and rarely speaks, said that if Cormac told me not to turn on the lights, there was a reason I didn't yet understand, but had to honor immediately. I found my slippers in the dark. My hands were shaking, not from cold, not from age, but from that particular terror only a parent knows when a child calls at midnight sounding like that. The hallway stretched ahead, dark and familiar. I had walked it 10,000 times. I knew which floorboard creaked third from the left at the top of the stairs, and I stepped around it on instinct. From behind a closed door at the far end of the hall, I could make out the slow, even rhythm of Celeste's breathing, deep, undisturbed. I moved past her door without a sound. Downstairs, the microwave clock glowed 12:23 in pale green. I crossed the kitchen, unlocked the back door, slow, no click, one hand steadying the latch, and slipped out into the night. The September air came at me hard, cool, and damp, carrying the smell of wet grass and cedar and something sharper beneath it, like earth freshly turned. The garden spread out before me, 30 yards of darkness between the house and the back fence. I crossed it on memory alone. 30 years of muscle memory, steering my feet along the stone path past the rose bushes Dorothea had planted, the year Declan was born, toward the small wooden shed, crouching under the oak tree at the far end. I hauled the door open, hinges groaning, just slightly stepped inside and drove the bolt home. The air inside smelled of motor oil and clay pots and old wood and the particular sadness of things that had once served a purpose. I pressed my back against the rear wall chest, heaving knees unsteady under me, and waited in the total dark. "What is happening?" I whispered to no one. "What on God's earth is happening?" Nothing answered. Only the oak tree shifting overhead, and somewhere out on the main road, the distant sound of a car, and then cutting through both the soft crunch of tires on gravel. A vehicle was pulling in from the service lane along the side of the property. Slowly. No headlights. My whole body went cold. I dropped to one knee, pressed my eye to the gap between two warped planks, and watched. The car rolled in with the engine barely above a whisper and parked along the side fence where the oak branches hung low enough to swallow the roofline. My knee ground against the dirt floor of the shed. I did not move. I did not breathe. Two doors opened. No dome light, they had killed it on purpose. Two figures stepped into the dark. And even at that distance, even with nothing but cloud-filtered moonlight to work with my body, recognized the taller one before my mind had a chance to. That walk, that slight forward, lean the left shoulder sitting half an inch lower than the right. I had watched that walk teach itself stumble through childhood and straighten into a man's. I had been proud of it once. Brendan. The word left me as nothing but a soundless breath swallowed at once by the dark of the shed. But my hand found the plank wall and gripped it hard enough that the wood bit into my palm, and I was grateful for the pain because it told me I was still on my feet. The second man I did not recognize. Shorter built like someone who moved heavy things for a living with a duffel bag hanging dense on his left side. He moved with the practiced quiet of a man who had done this kind of work before scanning the house exterior with quick, methodical eyes, already thinking several steps ahead. Brendan punched in the backdoor code, 4 digits, the same one we had used for 11 years the month and year Dorothea and I were married. I had never changed it. It had never crossed my mind that I should. The lock released with a soft click. They went inside. I pressed both palms flat against the shed wall and tried to slow my breathing, tried to convince myself there was some reasonable explanation, tried to find the version of this where my son was not standing in my house at 12:30 in the morning with a stranger I had never laid eyes on. That version did not exist. I searched for it and came up empty. Through the kitchen window, the one above the sink, the one that always fogged on cold mornings, the one Dorothea had hung curtains on in 2002, and I'd never had the heart to replace. I could see a thin flashlight beam moving through the ground floor. It swung left at the hallway and vanished toward my study. No. The word escaped before I could hold it, barely above a breath. No, no, no. My study held the house deed, the foundation incorporation papers, Dorothea's original trust summary, 3 decades of our family's legal history, every document that said this house and this legacy were ours, organized inside a fireproof cabinet I had always thought excessive. Dorothea had insisted on it. She had always been the careful one. I pressed my eye back to the gap and tracked the light moving behind the kitchen window. My chest was so tight I could feel each heartbeat separately, like something knocking from inside, urgent, wanting out. 4 minutes. Maybe 5. Then the beam swung back through the hallway. The back door opened. Brendan stepped out first, holding it wide. The second man followed, and now the duffel bag he carried hung heavier than before, fuller, stiffer, packed with something flat and rectangular. I knew the shape documents made when rolled into a bag. I had cleared out enough offices in my life to recognize it. They were 3 feet from the door when Brendan spoke, his voice low but carrying clean through the night air. "Did you get all of it?" The other man zipped the bag shut. "Your deeds, the corporate filings, the family trust summary. The amendment pages weren't in the cabinet, they must be with the attorney. Graydon has them." Brendan's voice was completely flat. Not nervous, not conflicted. Flat in the way a man sounds when he has long since made peace with every choice that led him here. It doesn't matter. Celeste already did her part." My grip on the plank tightened until I felt something give the wood or my hand, I still don't know which. Celeste already did her part. I turned those words over, slowly pressing them the way you press a bruise to measure how deep the damage runs. Part of what? Of tending to me. Of the pills she arranged each morning in that small ceramic dish, of the months of easy talk and hot meals, and the unhurried, gentle manner in which she had settled into the gap Dorothea had left. I wanted so badly to find an innocent explanation. I could practically taste the wanting. But there I was, crouched in that shed heart, hammering against bone legs, threatening to give, and I knew the way a man knows a thing he has been carefully not looking at, that innocent had no place in any of this. The car doors thumped shut. The engine caught and settled. They backed out of the service lane, dark, no lights, and vanished. I didn't move until the quiet had held long enough to trust. Then I walked back across the dark yard, in through the rear door, and went directly to my study. The filing cabinet wasn't shut all the way, just slightly ajar, the gap of a man who had been trying to look careful and hadn't quite managed it. I yanked the drawer open. The hanging files that had held the house deed and the foundation papers were bare. The plastic tab holders remained, each one still lettered in Dorothea's hand. My eyes stung. I held 2 fingers against her writing and pressed. "She made these labels," I said aloud to no one. The words scraped coming out. "Right here at this desk, she labeled every last one." A sound behind me. Gerald. Celeste was framed in the study doorway. One shoulder leaned against the frame, hair down, wrapped in the gray robe she always reached for on cool nights. Her gaze moved, face open, cabinet face again, quick enough to catch but smooth enough to disguise. "What are you doing up?" The question came out, light, unbothered, the tone of someone with no reason to be standing in a doorway at this hour. My jaw set. I held her gaze. "Much the same as you, I'd imagine." She tipped her head slightly and produced that warm, well-worn smile, the one that had done its work on me reliably for 14 months. "Come back to bed, sweetheart. You'll wear yourself out." I went up the stairs behind her. My hands had not stopped shaking. My chest carried the sensation of something being extracted from it. No anesthesia, no announcement, no sound. Simply absent now. Sleep never came. I lay flat on my back in the darkness, the ceiling fan a slow gray blur above me, and I turned those 5 words over in my mind, the ones that had reached me through the shed wall, and felt them quietly unmake everything I thought I had understood about the past 14 months. The sun rose without me having closed my eyes once. I was out of bed at 6:15, robe on, downstairs, before Celeste had stirred. September had gotten into the house the way it does when no one has yet thought to switch the heat on that particular cold that pools in corners and announces plainly that summer is done. I settled into Dorothea's armchair in the living room, wrapped both hands around my coffee mug, and let the heat work its way into my palms. Her chair. In all the years she was alive, I had not once sat in it. She'd laid claim to it 3 decades back, and that had been that. These past months I had taken it for my own nearly every morning, and I couldn't have told you whether what drove me there was sorrow or habit, or some quiet stubbornness I didn't have a name for. Her photograph sat on the mantel. That particular smile of hers, where the eyes moved first, and the mouth simply came along for the ride. I had first seen it at a faculty dinner in 1971 and spent the next 51 years grateful I hadn't talked myself out of walking over to her. "Dorothea," I said, my voice low and worn rough by a sleepless night. What did I miss? No answer. There never was one anymore. But I went on speaking to her the way I had each morning since last March, because the only alternative was a silence I hadn't yet learned to endure. 18 months gone. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed in December, and she was gone by March. The cruelest kind of quick. The doctors had spoken of things being aggressive, advanced, and I had gripped her hand so hard in that consultation room that she'd laughed and said, "Gerald, you're going to break my fingers and I'm going to need those." She could still pull a laugh out of me even then in that room. When she died, the house didn't become haunted. It became hollowed like a volume with its finest chapters ripped free. I moved through each room, recognizing all of it and feeling none of it. Brendan had begun appearing more frequently, twice a week, then 3 times, then practically daily. "Dad, you can't keep eating cereal for dinner." He'd positioned himself in my kitchen doorway one evening, arms folded, wearing the expression that meant something was about to be reorganized, whether I wanted it to be or not. "Let me help. That's what I'm here for." The gratitude I'd felt had been total. I'm ashamed of how complete it was. Celeste had been his idea. 6 months after Dorothea was gone, he'd phoned on a Sunday morning. "Dad, there's someone I want you to meet. Nothing formal, just lunch. She volunteers with the foundation. She's been asking about you." I nearly declined. Declining had become second nature over those 6 months. "Just lunch," Brendan had said. "1 hour. If it's awful, I'll drop it entirely." The restaurant was a small French bistro in Middleburg. White tablecloths, too much tarragon, exactly the kind of place Dorothea would have adored. Celeste was already at the table when we got there. 34, dark hair drawn back, dressed without fuss, in a way that suggested she hadn't labored over the impression she'd make. She rose when she saw us, and her opening words had nothing to do with the weather or the foundation or any of the safe, forgettable pleasantries people fall back on. She looked at me and said, "Brendan told me about Dorothea. I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitfield." She sounded like someone worth knowing. My throat sealed without warning. It took 2 attempts before I could produce any sound at all. "She was," I managed. "She really was." Celeste had smiled, not the broad, performative smile people aim at the bereaved, but something quieter and less rehearsed. "Tell me about her," she'd said. "If you're willing, I'd genuinely like to know." And so I had talked. For the first time in 6 months, I talked about Dorothea not as a death, but as a life, not the diagnosis, not the hospital, not the grim efficiency of those last weeks, but her. The way she kept 3 different ink colors going at once when she annotated a book. The way she could enter any gathering and zero in on the most compelling person in the room within a minute. The way she had taken the Whitfield Foundation from a notion floated across a dinner table and turned it into something that had sent 400 young people to college. Celeste had not glanced away once. Her phone sat untouched. I drove home that afternoon, carrying something I had not felt in 6 months. not happiness, that was too grand a word for it, just the tentative, fragile sense of being a degree or two less alone. Now I pressed my thumb against the mug's rim until it hurt, and forced myself to see that afternoon differently. Made myself put the question I'd been too comfortable to raise. Had Celeste asked about Dorothea out of genuine curiosity? Or had Brendan simply briefed her on exactly which door to knock on? The question moved through me like something cold. A second memory followed. Older one I hadn't retrieved in years. Brendan at 12 stationed in the upstairs hallway outside the boys' bedroom. A Saturday afternoon, Cormac had wrenched his ankle at soccer practice badly. Dorothea was inside with him, perched on the edge of his bed, one hand on his knee, steadying him with her voice. I had gone past the doorway and not stopped. What I hadn't witnessed, what Dorothea had mentioned to me offhand years afterward, as though it were barely a footnote, was that Brendan had remained planted in that hallway, watching her care for his brother, not stepping in, not saying a word, only watching. I had shelved the story and called it nothing. Children feel overlooked. They get past it. Sitting in Dorothea's chair at 6:30 in the morning, I arrived at something I had never let myself see. For some people, they don't get past it. It sets like concrete. It hardens into a private reckoning, a ledger of who received what, who was valued more, which child the world kept choosing. I should have seen it. I said it to her photograph, and my voice gave out on the final word, split open, spilling something unguarded and aching that I no longer had the reserves to hold in. God help me, Dorothea. I should have seen so much more than I did. Above me, a floorboard shifted. Celeste was up. I sat up straighter, gripped the mug a little tighter, and shaped my face into something that might pass for a man who had simply risen before the alarm. 68 years had given me plenty of practice wearing faces I didn't mean. I could manage one more. Footsteps on the stairs, the quiet pull of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then Celeste appeared in the doorway, already dressed, hair in order, holding her coffee. Her smile so warm and so well rehearsed, it set my back teeth on edge. "Morning," she said. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Old man problems." She tilted her head and studied me with those attentive eyes. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" "Fine." I lifted the mug. "Just fine." She moved to the window and stood looking out at the garden. I watched the back of her head and thought, you knew they were coming last night. You left the door open for them. You had already done your part. When she turned around, I met her with a smile and said, "Have you eaten? I could make eggs." And she said, "I'll make them. You sit." So I let her walk back into my kitchen and cook breakfast in my house, and I held the smile in place until my face went numb from the effort. That included leaving the back door code as it was the same 4 digits, the same entry point Brendan had punched in 2 nights ago. If I changed it now, he would sense the ground shifting beneath him, and I couldn't afford that. Not yet. She cooked the way she did everything, without a wasted motion, without a false step. 2 eggs, scrambled toast cut on the diagonal, coffee poured to exactly 3/4 of the mug, exactly as I had mentioned once 7 months ago that I liked it. She held on to details like that. She always had. There had been a time when I found it endearing. Now I watched her move through my kitchen with that seamless, almost rehearsed familiarity, reaching the right cabinet without glancing, knowing where the spatula lived, bypassing the good plates for the everyday ones, without a moment's pause, and felt something cold crawl up through the base of my spine. She knew this kitchen the way a person knows a space they've occupied for years. "Here you go." She placed the plate in front of me, then reached past me to the small ceramic dish she kept on the counter beside the coffee maker. Cream-colored with a green stripe, something she had brought from her own apartment when she moved in. She tipped 3 pills into the dish and nudged it in my direction. Don't forget these. 2 white, 1 yellow. Vitamins, she called them. Supplements for a man my age, something for the joints, something for the heart, something for general wellness. She had introduced them gradually starting roughly 4 months after we married, and I had taken them without a second thought, the way you take things from someone you trust. This morning I looked at those 3 pills and felt the floor drop. Thank you, I said. I picked up the white ones and held them in my open palm. Small. Unremarkable. The kind of thing a man could swallow every day for a year and never examine once. Celeste settled across from me with her coffee, crossed her legs, and turned to her phone, checking the news. Perfectly ordinary. I put the pills on my tongue, raised the mug, took a long swallow, and held them pressed against the inside of my lower lip. She didn't look up. I set the mug down and counted 4 seconds. Then I lifted my fork, and while she scrolled, I eased the pills beneath my tongue and angled my face toward the window as though something in the garden had caught my attention. I worked them into my cheek with my tongue. Did you sleep at all? She asked, her eyes still on the screen. A little, I said. My voice came out steadier than the rest of me felt. Not my best night. You should talk to Dr. Fenton about that. She glanced up, and her expression carried something that looked precisely like concern. Insomnia at your age can really wear you down, Gerald. I worry about you. Dr. Iris Fenton. Brendan had recommended her 8 months ago, a geriatric specialist. He'd said someone who understood the particular challenges facing men in their late 60s. I had gone twice. She had asked measured questions, taken careful notes, and sent measured letters to Brendan copying me that deployed words like monitoring and proactive management. It had all seemed very thorough, very responsible. I'm fine, I said. Just a restless night. I ate 2 bites of eggs, excused myself, and went to the bathroom. Standing at the sink, I opened my mouth and let 3 pills fall into my palm. I looked at them for a long moment, 2 white, 1 yellow, smooth and small, and giving nothing away. Then I crouched under the sink, found an old travel-sized toothpaste tube shoved to the very back, and pressed the pills carefully down into the cap. I stood up and looked at myself in the mirror. Something settled in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but a cold and deliberate resolution, the kind that arrives when a man decides he is done being moved across the board without his knowledge. All right, I said quietly to my reflection. Let's see what you've been giving me. Back in the kitchen, I finished my eggs, let Celeste top off my coffee, and accepted her suggestion that I take some air on the porch, that the morning would do me good. I sat in the porch chair and looked at the garden and tried to set what I knew beside what I only suspected. What I knew, Brendan had been in my house 2 nights ago. He had taken documents. He had said Celeste had already done her part. What I suspected, the brain fog that had been sitting over me for months, the way certain mornings my thoughts felt like they were moving through sand, the way I had begun to doubt my own memory, that wasn't age. That was those pills. What I did not know, how deep this went, how long it had been in the making, what the finish line looked like. Then I thought of the cameras. 3 months ago, a man had come to the house. Brendan had introduced him as a home security consultant, someone to modernize the system, he'd said, make things safer for a man living with a younger wife in more square footage than he needed. The man spent half a day working through the ground floor, and when he was done, there were small cameras positioned at the front entrance in the hallway and in the upper corner of the living room. It's just for peace of mind, Dad, Brendan had said, squeezing my shoulder. So I don't have to worry about you when I'm not around. I had thanked him. Through the glass from my porch chair, I could see the small camera mounted above the living room window. Its red indicator light pulsed once every few seconds, slow, even patient. Somewhere, someone was watching that feed. My hands closed on the armrests until the knuckles drained of color. For 3 months I had moved through this house drunk, my coffee, swallowed my pills, and lived my days while that little red light blinked overhead, and I had called it safety. You foolish old man. I breathed the words to no one, and they tasted like rust. I got up, went back inside, and walked to the study. The filing cabinet still sat with that one gutted drawer from the night before. I worked through what remained. The deed was gone, the foundation papers gone. But in the deepest corner of the bottom drawer, tucked behind a folder of old tax returns that no one in a hurry would bother lifting, I found something I had forgotten entirely. A blue folder, fat, with pages labeled in Brendan's hand. Not mine. I opened it. The top sheet was a formal legal document printed on letterhead. I didn't recognize its title, centered and bolded across the top of the page. In the matter of Gerald Owen Whitfield petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate. My name, my address, my date of birth arranged in clean black type as though they were elements of a case rather than markers of a life. The words softened at the edges. I blinked them back into sharpness and read the first paragraph. It declared that I showed signs of cognitive decline, that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, that I posed a risk to myself and to the financial assets in my care, that the person best suited to assume guardianship was my son, Brendan Keith Whitfield. I lowered myself into the desk chair in the careful, deliberate way of a man whose legs have quietly decided they've done enough. The folder rested open across my hands, and I read it through twice, beginning to end. When I was finished, I set it on the desk with the precision of someone handling a thing they cannot afford to drop. My eyes burned. My throat had locked tight. He's going to take everything, I said to the empty study. The words came out barely above a whisper, thin as paper. He's going to take this house. He's going to take the foundation. He's going to take everything your mother and I spent 50 years building. I pressed my fist hard against my mouth. Then I picked up the folder, returned it to the precise spot I had found. It eased the drawer shut and pushed my desk chair back into place. If Brendan needed me to be an oblivious old man who had no idea what was unfolding around him, then that was exactly who I would be, until I had enough in my hands to become something else. I stood at my desk for a long time after closing that drawer. Morning light entered through the study blinds in thin, pale bands falling across the empty filing cabinet, across the desktop, where Dorothea's reading glasses still rested in their case unmoved since the day she died. 51 years of constructing something together, and it had taken Brendan a single midnight visit to strip the paper record of it out of the room. My hands would not quiet down. I picked up my phone and dialed Cormac. 3 rings, 4, then the automated voice. The person you are calling is unavailable. Please leave a message after the tone. Cormac. My voice came out wound tight. Call me back. It's important. Don't call the house line. Call my cell. A pause. Please, son. I ended the call and stood there with the phone held against my chest. He didn't call back. I tried again at 11:00. Same result. At noon, I sent a text. Call me when you can. Urgent. Then I watched the screen for 20 minutes without a response. The message sat there with a single gray checkmark undelivered, meaning his phone was either switched off or out of reach. That was when Brendan arrived. He came in through the front door without knocking, using his key. He had always had a key. Before last night, that had seemed like the most natural arrangement in the world. He moved into the kitchen where I sat with a cup of cold coffee and dropped into the chair across from me with the easy confidence of a man who has never once doubted his welcome. Morning, Dad. He reached over and squeezed my forearm. "You look tired. Didn't sleep getting old," I said. I manufactured a smile. "It took effort, the kind you feel in the jaw. You know how it is. You should mention that to Dr. Fenton." He pulled out his phone and began scrolling with one thumb. "Sleep disruption at your age is worth taking seriously. I can have her add it to your file." "That's thoughtful of you," I said. Every syllable came out smooth, unhurried. I was getting competent at this more quickly than I would have liked, and I couldn't decide whether that made me capable or something worse. "Have you heard from Cormac lately? I've been trying to reach him." Something moved across Brendan's face, subtle, almost invisible. A slight tightening at the corners of the eyes there, and gone inside a second. "Cormac's deep in an operation right now, Dad. You know how he goes when he's in the field. Dark for weeks at a stretch." "Of course." I nodded slowly. I just wanted to hear his voice. "I'll try to get a message to him," Brendan said, eyes already returning to his phone. "Don't worry about it." The offhandedness of it, "don't worry about it," dropped into my chest, like a stone into still water. He had just told me not to pursue the one person who had called to warn me, and he had delivered it in the tone he used to discuss the weather. After Brendan left, I went out to the garden. The afternoon had gone cool. The sky that flat, non-committal gray of a Virginia September that can't decide between summer and autumn. I was deadheading Dorothea's roses along the back fence she had put them in the year we bought this house, and I tended them badly, but without fail, when I heard a familiar voice from the other side of the fence. "Gerald." Bernadette Forsyth, 70 years old, and sharp as a tack, stood at the fence line in her garden coat, a small spiral notebook pressed against her chest. She had been our neighbor for 23 years. She had brought soup during Dorothea's treatment and pie after Dorothea passed, and she tracked everything that moved on Heathermore Drive with the quiet, thorough attention of a woman who had nowhere more pressing to be. I wasn't going to say anything. I kept telling myself it wasn't her business. I straightened up from the rose bed. "Bernadette, what is it?" "That car." She dropped her voice, leaning slightly across the fence post. "The dark one, no headlights." Her eyes held the kind of seriousness that makes your throat tighten. "It's come 3 times now, always after 11, always pulls into your service lane and clears out within the hour." First time I told myself I was imagining things. Second time I wrote it down. She lifted the notebook. Third time I got out of bed and photographed the license plate from my bedroom window. My heart knocked hard. I moved closer to the fence. "Bernadette, I know it's probably nothing." She was already tearing a page loose, the soft spiral rip cutting through the still afternoon air. "But your Dorothea always said the things that feel like nothing are usually something. And I thought if she were still here, she'd want someone to say something to you." Her voice gentled on Dorothea's name just slightly. "So I'm saying it." She pressed the folded paper into my hand. I looked down. A license plate number printed in careful block letters, 3 dates and times listed beneath. The most recent was last night, 12:22 in the morning, 9 minutes after Cormac had called me. My eyes stung badly enough that I had to turn away, making a show of looking at the roses. I clamped my back teeth together and breathed through my nose until the burning eased. "Thank you," I said once I trusted my voice. I turned back and held Bernadette's gaze. "Thank you, Bernadette. This helps more than you know." She reached over the fence and patted my hand, once the way people do when the right words aren't available. "You take care of yourself," she said quietly. "Dorothea would want that." I folded the paper and tucked it into my shirt pocket close against my chest. I was still at the fence when my phone buzzed. Not a call, a text from a number I didn't recognize. 7 words, no punctuation, no sign-off. "The back of the medicine cabinet." I read it twice. Then I went inside, climbed the stairs to the bathroom, and opened the cabinet. Behind my shaving kit, pressed into the far back corner, was a small, folded square of paper I had never put there. I opened it. Aunt Harriet's tomorrow. Bring the pills. Tell no one. A. My legs went unsteady beneath me. I gripped the edge of the sink with both hands and held on. He had been watching. He had been watching through all of it. And just then, from the foot of the stairs, Celeste's voice drifted up. Gerald Brendan's on the phone. He wants to know if you're free Thursday evening. Dr. Fenton would like to stop by for a quick check-in. I looked at my own face in the medicine cabinet mirror, gray-red rimmed at the eyes, knuckles blanched against the porcelain. Tell him Thursday works perfectly. I called back down. My voice carried exactly the right warmth, exactly the right ease. I was learning to deceive my own family, and I hated how readily it came. I told Celeste I needed to run to the pharmacy in Charlottesville. That wasn't entirely untrue. There was a pharmacy on the same block as Harriet's house, and I did pull into its lot for 4 minutes before driving 2 blocks further and parking outside a pale blue Craftsman with a flower box under every window. Harriet Dunmore had lived in that house for 15 years. Dorothea used to call it the cheerful house, no matter the season. Harriet always had something in bloom. I rang the bell, and Harriet had the door open before the chime finished. She was 64 years old, with Dorothea's same dark eyes and a short silver bob she had worn for as long as I could remember. She was smaller than her sister, more compact, with the precise and unhurried movements of someone who had spent 20 years as a floor nurse and carried that version of herself everywhere she went since. She took one look at my face, and her expression shifted not to alarm, but to something quieter and more grave. Gerald? She stepped back and pulled the door wide. Come in. You look terrible. I know, I said. My throat had gone tight before I even crossed the threshold. She brought me through to the kitchen. Sage-green walls, herbs growing in clay pots on the windowsill, the smell of tea already brewed. The whole room carried Dorothea's fingerprints, her sense of what a kitchen ought to feel like. And I needed a moment with my eyes on the ceiling and my mouth pressed shut before I could lower myself into the chair. Talk, Harriet said, nudging a mug across to me. So I did. All of it. Cormac's phone call. The shed. Brendan and the stranger hauling that duffel bag. The documents. The 5 words that had drifted through the gap between those old planks. A guardianship petition filed under my own name tucked inside my own cabinet. The pills Celeste pressed into my palm each morning, the ones I'd been palming and hiding away for 3 days now. Bernadette's notebook. The note Cormac had tucked inside the medicine cabinet. Harriet sat opposite me through every word of it, without once lifting her coffee. Palms down on the table, gaze locked on mine, she listened the way Dorothea used to listen, not performing attention, just giving it as if the story I was telling was the only thing on earth that deserved her focus right then. Silence fell over the kitchen when I ran out of words. Somewhere beyond the window, a bird climbed a single long note and held it there. The pills, Harriet said. Did you bring them? My hand went to my jacket pocket, and I set the old toothpaste cap down between us. She lifted it, worked it open, and shook the little pills into her palm, 2 white, 1 yellow. She brought them close to her face, rotating them, reading the markings pressed into each one. She raised a finger and held a white pill near her nose. Harriet, I began. I'm not making a diagnosis. She cut in firm, not glancing up. 30 years ago, I retired from nursing, not pharmacology, but 2 decades of identifying medications by sight and smell, because half my patients walked in unable to name what they'd swallowed teaches you things." She tipped them back into the cap. "Those white ones need to go to a lab. The coding pattern and the score lines don't correspond to any multivitamin formula I recognize. The yellow, I'm less sure, but that shade is wrong for a standard B complex." The hand I had resting on the tabletop had developed a tremor. I flattened it down and kept it there. If someone were administering low doses of a sedative to a person consistently over months, I said, measuring each word, what would the picture look like from the outside? Harriet's eyes didn't waver. "It would look like growing old," she said, the mind going foggy, struggling to stay on a thought, blanking on things that should be second nature. The occasional shake in the hands. A beat. Doubting yourself, every last bit of air left my body at once. I had called myself a paranoid old man 6 months ago. The words came out of me and cracked apart in the middle, splitting open on something raw and shamed that I'd been pressing down for months. I had said it to myself. I told myself, "Gerald, you are 68 years old. You are a widower still learning to grieve. And this unease, this suspicion, is simply what that process feels like." Stop. Harriet's hand shot across the table and clamped around mine, not a comfort, not a consolation, a command in the shape of a grip. "Don't. Hear me. I have known you for 30 years, and you are among the sharpest people I've ever met. Dorothea said the same thing always. She told me the day Gerald Whitfield starts losing the thread is the day I have myself committed." Her voice snagged briefly on Dorothea's name, and she pulled it straight. "What's happening to you isn't collapse. It's assault. Those are not the same thing, and you have to understand that distinction." A hot pressure gathered behind my eyes. I angled my face toward the window and blinked once, deliberately, then again, until the sensation retreated to something I could contain. "There's a contact of mine in the hospital lab," Harriet said, letting go of my hand and picking up her phone. "She'll run these off the books, no identifying information, and I'll have answers by tomorrow morning." She was already scrolling. "Before I step out to call her, I need you to write out every symptom you can put a name to with rough dates attached. Can you manage that?" "Yes," I said. "Yes, I can do that." She moved into the hallway. I stayed in the sage-green kitchen herbs in clay pots along the sill, the smell of tea already brewed, and sat with Dorothea's handwriting on the labels of those herb pots. Harriet had kept them from a gift Dorothea had brought over years ago. I pressed my knuckles to my mouth, drew slow air through my nose, and worked very hard to hold myself together. Largely, I managed. When Harriet returned 10 minutes later, phone out of sight, her face had settled into the practiced composure that nurses learn so their patients don't have to absorb whatever is behind it. "First thing tomorrow," she said. "I'll reach you through the number Cormac provided, not your main cell." She reclaimed her chair and curled both hands around her mug. "Gerald, beyond Cormac. Who else is aware of any of this?" "Cormac," I said. "Bernadette Forsyth, in part. She can tell something has gone wrong. She doesn't have the full picture." "Anyone you'd trust without reservation," I thought it through carefully. "Clifford Graydon," I said. "Dorothea's attorney. He's been the custodian of her trust documents for years." A hesitation. "I believe she left something in his care. Something intended for me in case things deteriorated." Harriet held my gaze for a long, measured moment. "Go see Clifford," she said, her voice low. "Don't wait." I gave her a nod. I lifted my mug and drank deeply, though it had long since gone cold. I needed the occupation for my hands. Then I drove home and arrived in time for dinner. Celeste had made roasted salmon and roasted vegetables, and warmth and good smells filled the kitchen, and she turned and smiled at me and said, "Perfect timing." I kissed her cheek and told her it smelled wonderful. She faced the stove again, and I stood at her back and felt something pass through me, cold old without a name. The specific sorrow of a man who has just grasped that every ordinary thing surrounding him is a kind of lie. Brendan showed up that evening with no warning at all. He came through the front door beside a woman I had never laid eyes on. 50-something, a tailored gray suit leather portfolio pinned under one arm, her smile the careful, practiced kind worn by people who frequently enter rooms where they are not entirely wanted. "Dad," Brendan rested a hand on my shoulder. "This is Dr. Iris Fenton. The two of you have spoken by phone. I thought it would be good for her to come by in person. Low-key, informal, nothing to be concerned about." Dr. Fenton offered her hand. "Mr. Whitfield, wonderful to meet you face to face at last. Just a handful of questions, if that's all right." Her portfolio was already open. Dr. Iris Fenton possessed the sort of face built for the purpose of disarming people. Eyes soft behind wire-rimmed glasses, her tone pitched to exactly the frequency that says nothing is wrong, her fingers moving through her documents with the ease of someone who had staged this scene in dozens of other living rooms. She took the armchair across from me as though it had always been hers, ankles together, expression warm. "Mr. Whitfield, this is simply a conversation," she said. "Nothing clinical, nothing intimidating. Gentlemen in your age group, I do this kind of visit constantly." "Yeah, gentlemen in your age group." I held my expression steady and open, and thought that line came straight from a training manual. "Naturally," I said, pleasant as ever. "Anything that's useful." Brendan had positioned himself at the sofa's far corner, phone turned face down on his knee, wearing a look of measured worry that set my molars on edge. Celeste lingered at the kitchen doorway, a dish towel in her grip that she'd long since stopped pretending to use. Dr. Fenton uncapped her pen. "We'll keep it easy to start. Today's date. September 19th, Thursday." She put something to paper. The year 2023. The pen moved again. I studied it and thought, what exactly are you recording? Every answer I gave was right. What is there to note? Wonderful. The warm smile reappeared. "I'm going to show you some images now. Just tell me what each one is." A laminated card appeared, a line drawing of a clock. I identified it. Then a house, a dog, a pair of glasses. Each one named before she'd fully extended the card. My voice didn't hitch. My hands lay quiet in my lap, not because I was calm, but because I refused to let them move, and underneath that refusal was not confusion, but pure, white-hot fury. "Excellent," another note. She tipped her head at a slight angle, telegraphing delicacy. "I am picking up a minor hesitation in certain responses, Mr. Whitfield. A fractional delay between question and answer. That's the kind of thing I like to record." My jaw locked so tightly the pressure registered in my ears. A hesitation. Every response had cleared 2 seconds. "He forgot his own birthday last month." Brendan put in from the sofa, his delivery gentle and utterly maddeningly credible. "Told me he figured it was in August. It's in July." I looked at my son. I said I didn't feel like celebrating Brendan. I didn't say I didn't know when it was. Something moved across Brendan's face there and gone before I could put a word to it. He dipped his head slowly. "Of course, Dad. I just want to make sure Dr. Fenton has the complete picture." The complete picture. Those words settled in my gut like something that had turned. Dr. Fenton closed her portfolio 20 minutes later and took my hand in both of hers. "Mr. Whitfield, you've been very cooperative. I'll have my written assessment to Brendan within the week." She held on a beat past what the moment called for. "Please don't worry. Your well-being is my only concern. After they left Brendan walking Dr. Fenton out to her car, Celeste slipping upstairs, I stood at the living room window and tracked the red glow of her sedan's taillights backing out of the drive. My well-being, I said to my own reflection in the dark glass. The words came out frayed at the edges, worn down by an entire evening of feigning a composure I hadn't actually possessed. Right. The next morning, I made the drive to see Bettina Sargent. Bettina had kept our house for 14 years before she retired 2 years back at 67. She lived in a small ranch house in Forest, roughly 12 minutes from Heathermore Drive. When I knocked at 9:00 in the morning, she pulled the door open at once, as though she'd been waiting for the sound. Mr. Whitfield. She was a compact woman, white-haired, reading glasses riding permanently up on her forehead. She eased back from the doorway and said, "I wondered when you'd come." That landed like a hand on my chest. You wondered. "Hush, come in," she said. "I'll put some tea on." Her living room had the precise tidiness of someone who lives alone and keeps things ordered as a way of keeping herself ordered. She brought 2 cups through and settled across from me, hands folded in her lap. "What did you want to tell me, Bettina?" She drew a long breath first. Around 2 months before Mrs. Whitfield passed, she began choosing each word with care. I came across Mr. Brendan in her room. Late in the afternoon, Mrs. Whitfield was sleeping. She slept heavily toward the end. He was going through the nightstand drawer and the small filing cabinet she kept near the window. My cup stopped halfway up, and I set it back down without drinking. I asked him what he was after. Bettina went on her voice level, but her hands pressing tight against each other in her lap. He said he was locating her insurance papers, that he wanted to help get things organized. A pause. But Mr. Whitfield, the insurance papers lived in the kitchen cabinet. Mrs. Whitfield had always stored them there. I maintained that cabinet myself every single year. Her gaze found mine and anchored there. What he was carrying when he walked out of her room was not insurance papers. It was a green folder, legal-sized, the kind Mrs. Whitfield used for foundation documents. The blood left my face so abruptly, the room shifted around me. I should have said something then. Bettina told me, and her voice fractured on the last word, breaking apart under a guilt she had clearly been hauling around for the better part of 2 years. I kept reasoning that it was family business, that it wasn't my place. But she was so good to me, Mr. Whitfield. Mrs. Whitfield was the finest employer I ever worked for, and I just... Bettina. I leaned across and laid my hands over hers where they were pressed together. My throat had gone raw. You couldn't have known. None of us could see the whole shape of it yet. She pressed her lips flat together and gave a rapid, tight nod. I drove home with both hands clenched on the wheel knuckles, aching, a burning white clarity moving through my chest that was part fury, part grief, and part a love for Dorothea so sharp it felt like something torn open. She had been dying. She had been there in her own bed sleeping while her son went through her private files, and she had still managed, in whatever time was left to her, to find a way to shield us. My phone buzzed at a red light. Unknown number, 1 line of text. Check the Foundation's Q3 report. Look at the transfer entries, 1 letter at the bottom. My son. He had been watching all of this every day without a word. I drove the rest of the way home with Cormac's message pressed against my ribs like an ember. Check the Foundation's Q3 report. Look at the transfer entries. The Foundation. The Whitfield Foundation. Dorothea's real child, as she had always called it. 22 years of constructing something that outlasted careers and market collapses, and one brutal stretch in 2007 that nearly broke us entirely. It had come through all of that because Dorothea had run it with the same pairing of genuine warmth and exacting precision she applied to everything that mattered to her. I waited until Celeste went upstairs to shower. Then I went to the study, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Foundation's board portal. The Q3 report ran to 40 pages. I went straight for the transfer ledger. 3 entries brought me to a full stop. The first $180,000 wired to a company called BVR Consulting LLC, dated August 15th, filed under Strategic Advisory Services. I had no knowledge of BVR Consulting. I had not authorized that payment. The second $120,000 to Roanoke Property Advisors, dated September 2nd. Same category, same absence. No recollection of approving it, no corresponding project anywhere in the Foundation's activity log. The third entry dropped the floor out entirely. $75,000 to Blue Ridge Horizon Partners, dated September 10th, 9 days ago. The authorization signature on the digital form read, R. Whitfield, Board Chair. My name. Except I hadn't signed a single document in 6 weeks. "That's not my approval," I said to the empty study. My voice came out hard and clipped. That is not my signature. I shoved back from the desk, pressed both palms flat against my thighs, and forced myself to breathe at a measured pace. Terrence Beaumont. The man who had walked out my front door with a bag stuffed with documents. The man Brendan had introduced as a security consultant, but who carried himself like someone whose real expertise lay somewhere considerably darker. He had the Foundation's corporate filings in his possession now, and apparently he also had a serviceable reproduction of my handwriting. Then a memory surfaced, something Dorothea had said over dinner in November 2021, 3 months before her diagnosis. Dropped into the conversation the way she mentioned things that actually mattered sideways without fanfare. "Brendan asked me to sign some Foundation papers last week. I told him to take it up with Clifford." I had nodded and passed the bread and let it go entirely. She had gone to Clifford, not to me. Clifford. I opened my email and ran a search for Clifford Graydon in the archive. A message came up, dated 8 months ago, subject line, "No action required at this time, FYI only." I had filed it away unread, because the subject line instructed me to. I opened it now. 2 paragraphs. The first laid out that Dorothea had worked with Clifford to establish an irrevocable trust 6 months before she died, designating Cormac as the trustee with oversight responsibility for Foundation operations. The second paragraph was a single sentence that took the air clean out of my lungs. Mrs. Whitfield cited concerns about a pattern of financial decision-making by Brendan Whitfield and asked that this arrangement be kept confidential until such time as it became necessary to act upon. I read it 3 times over. My eyes were burning so badly the screen blurred in front of me. She knew I whispered. The words tore loose in a rough, ragged way, the way things come out when they've been sealed up too long. "Dorothea, you knew this entire time, and you carried all of it alone." My throat locked. I pressed the back of my hand hard against my mouth and held it there until the worst of the wave had passed. The following morning, a plain white envelope was lying on the study floor just inside the door. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single folded sheet. Handwriting I knew the way you know, a voice heard suddenly in the dark, instantly, without needing to think. "Dad. 7 months undercover tracking Brendan's companies alongside Detective Strickland's Financial Crimes Unit. I can't call. They have a shadow application running on your phone that mirrors every call and text. Declan is safe and knows I'm okay. Don't react to anything out of the ordinary. I'm close. Trust Clifford Graydon completely." See. My legs gave. I sat down on the study floor with my back braced against the desk, the letter held in both hands, and for the first time since that midnight phone call, I let the full weight of what had been happening settle onto me without pushing it away. 7 months. Cormac had been working this case for 7 months, cut off from me, keeping watch from a distance, unable to get a single word through. And I had believed Brendan when he said Cormac didn't care. The shame of that struck me like a fist square to the sternum, leaving me winded and hollowed clean out. "I'm sorry," I said aloud to the empty room, to the son who was not there to hear it. "Cormac, I am so sorry." I stayed on the floor for a long moment. Then I got up, folded the letter, and burned it over the study trash can. Using a lighter, I turned up in the desk drawer. I watched the paper curl and go black and dissolve into ash, and I made a promise to myself I was done. Being a piece moved around this board by people who understood the game and counted on me not to. I straightened, looked at the camera mounted in the corner of the study ceiling, the one I'd only noticed 2 days ago, the one Terence Beaumont had put in without a word to me, and gave it a pleasant, vacant smile. The kind a bewildered old man might aim at a smoke detector he'd just registered for the first time. Let Brendan watch. Let him see precisely what he was expecting. Because what he could not see was what had already been set in motion. 3 days after I reduced Cormac's letter to ash in the study trash can, someone pressed the front doorbell at 2:00 in the afternoon. Celeste was out. She'd mentioned something about a salon appointment, kissed my cheek with that practiced warmth of hers, and pulled out of the drive at noon. I had spent the preceding 3 hours at the kitchen table behind the facade of a newspaper, actually working through every foundation document I could still reach, matching dates to names, until my eyes burned and the columns blurred. I opened the front door and felt the ground go slightly soft under me. The woman on my porch was 36, with shadows deep under her eyes, and the particular set to her jaw that belongs to someone who has reached a hard decision and won't be talked back from it. I knew her from a photograph. A single photograph Dorothea had kept tucked in her bedside drawer without ever offering an explanation. A wedding picture from a marriage that had run 3 years and ended badly. Brendan's ex-wife. "Mr. Whitfield." Her voice held, but her hands had both fists closed around her purse strap, knuckles drained of color. "I know I should have phoned first. I wasn't confident you'd agree to see me if I had." I moved back from the door. "Come in, Adrienne." A long, unsteady exhale left her the kind that's been compressed since the parking lot. "Thank you." I led her to the kitchen. She sat across from me, set her purse on the table, and looked at me with eyes that were tired but sharp. "Adrienne, what brings you here?" I asked, not without kindness but without detour, because I was well past dancing around things. "Because Brendan sent me a letter last week." She reached into her purse and produced a folded document, sliding it across the table toward me. "His attorney is claiming I violated a non-disparagement clause from our divorce settlement. He's demanding the return of $60,000 from the financial agreement." Her mouth thinned. "That clause was boilerplate. I haven't said a public word about him in 3 years. But Brendan never does anything for more than one reason, Mr. Whitfield. And that reason is always about clearing the field before a major move." My chest went cold and tight. "He's covering his tracks. Every one of them." She came forward, both palms flat on the table, her voice dropping and sharpening at once. I came because I recognize what he does in the period before he takes something. I saw it throughout our marriage. He grows very organized, very efficient, very warm to everyone in the room, right up until the moment he isn't." Her eyes were fierce and glistening at the edges. "I won't stay home and watch him do to you what he did to your wife." The air left my chest. "Dorothea." Adrian's jaw tightened for a moment. 2 years into our marriage, I found a document in Brendan's desk, a loan agreement for $75,000 drawn against the foundation's operating fund. She pressed her lips together. The signature on it was Dorothea's, but I had been in the room when Dorothea signed things at family dinners at foundation events. That signature was not hers. The hand lying on the table began to shake. I pressed it flat and kept it there with the last of whatever I had left. I confronted him. Adrienne went on, her voice catching slightly on that word, confronted, as if the memory of it still extracted something from her. He said it was a clerical error, an administrative mix-up. He was so calm, Mr. Whitfield, completely, perfectly calm. And then Dorothea called him the following day. She'd found out somehow. She always found out. I heard his side of that conversation through the kitchen door, and I thought she is going to take him apart. Adrienne shook her head slowly, but she didn't. She told me afterwards she couldn't bring herself to do it to the family. She changed every lock on every document cabinet she owned and never extended him access again. My throat had shut entirely. I was looking down at the surface of the kitchen table at the grain of the wood Dorothea had chosen at a showroom in Charlottesville 20 years ago, and I was thinking she bore that alone. For years she carried it, and she never once the back door swung open. I spun in my chair, heart slamming against my ribs. A 16-year-old boy stepped into my kitchen wearing a navy hoodie and a backpack baseball cap, turned backward, a bottle of Gatorade already in one hand. He pulled up short when he spotted Adrienne, glanced at her, then turned to me with his father's eyes set into his mother's face. "Hey, Grandpa." Declan Whitfield, my grandson. Cormac's son dropped his backpack on the floor with a thud that rattled the herb pots on the windowsill. "Well, Dad said to check in on you. Hope that's okay. I came in through the back, the code's the same as always." A relief so sudden and violent it nearly felt like injury broke open somewhere behind my sternum. "Declan." My voice came out rough and thick. Yeah, that's okay. Sit down." He pulled out the chair next to mine, reversed it, and straddled it the way teenagers do, arms folded over the back. He looked at Adrienne with the uncomplicated directness of someone who hadn't yet learned that looking is considered rude. "I'm Adrienne," she said. "I know who you are," Declan said simply. Then he swung a scuffed laptop from his backpack onto the table and had it open before it had fully landed. "Grandpa, I'm going to use your Wi-Fi. Mine runs slow at home." "Of course," I said. He was typing within 30 seconds, fast-practiced, barely needing to look down. Adrienne caught my eyes across the table, and I could see her weighing whether to continue with him sitting there. I gave her a small nod. She leaned in again. "The reason I'm telling you all of this," she said, keeping her voice low, "is that Brendan did not suddenly become this person. He has been this person his entire life, and the only thing that ever checked him was Dorothea. And Dorothea is—" Her voice broke on it. She drew a sharp breath and steadied herself. "She's not here anymore, so someone else has to be." Declan raised his eyes from the screen, not toward Adrienne, toward me. His expression was calm and held an odd gravity that made him look suddenly older than 16 by a significant margin. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Your router is putting out 2 separate frequencies. That's not normal for a home setup." He angled the laptop around so I could see the screen, a network diagnostics display, columns of data I could only partially parse. "Someone added a secondary device to your network. It's mirroring your camera feeds and routing everything to an external IP address." A deep quiet settled over the kitchen. Adrienne sat up straight, and her color drained away. I looked at my grandson, this boy who had walked in through the back door carrying a bottle of Gatorade and a backpack, and had just confirmed the thing I had feared since the night I discovered the camera in the study ceiling, and felt a surge rise up through me so forceful it nearly knocked me sideways. Pride and terror and gratitude wound together so tightly I couldn't separate them. Can you trace whose IP address it is? I asked. My voice came out level. I had spent the past week teaching myself to keep it that way. Declan was already typing. Way ahead of you, he said. He worked without once looking up for 40 minutes straight. I sat across from him and watched his fingers move over the keys with a fluid, unhesitating ease, the ease of someone who thinks in a language most people never learn to read. Adrienne had gone 20 minutes before. She'd squeezed my hand at the door, said, "I'm sorry it took me this long," and walked to her car with her shoulders back and her head level, the posture of someone who has finally set down a burden they have been hauling for years. I'd stood in the doorway watching her and thought Dorothea would have cared for her. She always said Brendan had married exactly the right woman and then pushed her out. Got it. Declan sat straight and turned the screen toward me. The external IP address belongs to a registered business, Beaumont Digital Solutions, LLC, registered in Roanoke, Virginia. The name hit me square in the chest, like a closed fist. What comes next is the moment I had been building towards, without fully knowing it, the point where everything I thought I understood about my own household shifts beneath my feet. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you discovered someone close to you had been quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait, gather everything, and let the truth do the work? Terence Beaumont, I said. Declan's eyes sharpened. You know that name? He came to this house 3 months ago, I said, keeping my voice easy and conversational, conscious of the camera blinking in the living room corner, speaking the way a man with nothing to hide speaks. Brendan introduced him as a home security consultant. Declan looked at me for one long, measured beat. His father's eyes in a 16-year-old face, then turned back to the screen. He's been pulling your camera feeds every 8 hours, he said. Live and recorded. Whoever holds access to that IP address can see everything that's gone on inside this house since those cameras were installed. He paused, fingers suspended above the keyboard. I can kill the transmission, cut them off entirely, but if I do, whoever's on the other end will know the feed went dark. Don't touch it, I said at once. Leave everything exactly where it is. Declan dipped his head slowly. Smart, he said, and the plain word landed heavier than he likely meant it to. He pulled a thumb drive from his backpack pocket and plugged it into the side of his laptop. I'm going to pull down the full archive of everything that's been sent out. Every clip, every timestamp. Give me 40 minutes. Take whatever you need, I said. The following morning, I drove to Lynchburg alone. The cafe was on Jefferson Avenue, small, independent, the kind of place that cultivated a deliberate unglamour, mismatched chairs, decent coffee tables, set far enough apart that a conversation stayed private. I had the address from Declan, who'd gotten it through a message routed by way of Cormac's contact. Garrett Howell was already there when I walked in. 31 years old, sandy hair, the slightly hollowed look of a man who hadn't been sleeping well since losing a job he hadn't seen coming. He had a black coffee in front of him and a laptop bag beneath his chair. He stood when he spotted me, a reflex of professional courtesy that caught me off guard given the circumstances. Mr. Whitfield. He put out his hand. His grip was firm, but his eyes were uneasy, cutting to the door and back. Thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I sat and kept my voice low. Cormac's contact told me you were let go from the foundation last month. What happened? Garrett wrapped both hands around his mug. I was doing routine server maintenance 6 weeks ago, he said. Part of my duties was archiving old email threads. Anything beyond 3 years gets compressed and stored. But I came across a folder that had been manually deleted from the server. Not archived. Someone had gone in and wiped it clean. His jaw tightened. When I started examining what had been erased, I was called into Priscilla Danforth's office the very next morning. and handed a termination letter. Priscilla Danforth. The Foundation's executive director, a role Dorothea had placed her in 7 years ago because she was sharp and organized, and we had all believed completely trustworthy. My hands tightened around my own cup until the ceramic dug into my palms. What was in that deleted folder? Garrett reached into his laptop bag and placed a thumb drive on the table between us. Small, black, unremarkable. Emails between Brendan Whitfield and Priscilla Danforth going back 14 months, he said. I recovered them before they stripped my access. I've been holding on to them because I didn't know who I could trust. He nudged the drive a half-inch closer to me. I know who to trust now. I picked it up. My hand was shaking, not from the pills I had stopped swallowing, but from something that felt very much like the earth finally firming beneath my feet after weeks of giving way beneath me. That evening, with Declan beside me and the thumb drive plugged into a laptop Cormac had instructed Declan to bring from his own home, not mine, not with those cameras watching, I read what Garrett Howell had recovered. The emails were methodical and cold, in the way that planning always looks when people write it down, believing they will never be found out. Brendan and Priscilla had established 3 shell companies, LLCs, registered in Virginia, with no employees, no office, no actual services of any kind. Under federal nonprofit law, a foundation like ours is legally barred from moving funds to for-profit entities without documented services rendered. Every dollar that had flowed to BVR Consulting, Roanoke Property Advisors, and Blue Ridge Horizon Partners was fraudulent on its face. But the email that made Declan set down his Gatorade and look at me with wide, alarmed eyes was dated 11 months ago. Brendan to Priscilla. Once the guardianship is formalized and trustee authority transfers from Cormac to me, we can move the endowment full amount. The offshore account is ready. The endowment. $4.2 million that Dorothea had assembled over 20 years, donor by donor, event by event, late night after late night, at that kitchen table with her reading glasses pushed up her nose and her calculator at her elbow. $4.2 million that Brendan intended to shift offshore the moment he controlled my signature. Grandpa Declan's voice had gone very quiet. Are you okay? I was staring at the screen, and I was feeling something I had not felt in a very long time. Not grief, not confusion, not the thick, cottony helplessness that had blanketed the preceding months. This was something older and cleaner and considerably more dangerous. I'm better than okay, I said, and I meant it. My phone buzzed. A text from Brendan, warm, easy, entirely unsuspecting. Dad, Dr. Fenton finished her evaluation report. We should sit down this week and talk about next steps. How's Wednesday? I wrote back. Wednesday works perfectly, son. Looking forward to it. I set the phone face down on the table and looked at Declan, and for the first time in months I felt something that might carefully, cautiously be called the beginning of a plan. Clifford Graydon called me on a Thursday morning. Not on my regular cell on the secondary number Declan had set up for me 2 days before a prepaid phone that rode in my jacket pocket and that Celeste had never laid eyes on. When it buzzed against my ribs at 8:45, I was standing at the kitchen sink with a mug in my hand, pretending to wash it, and I nudged the faucet up slightly before I answered. Gerald Clifford's voice was unchanged from the 20 years I had known it. Unhurried, precise, carrying the particular gravity of a man who weighed every word before he released it. I think it's time you came to see me. Today, if you're able. My grip on the mug tightened. I'm able. Good. Come alone. Park on the street, not the lot. The lot feeds to the building management system through a camera. A pause. Dorothea was actually very specific about that detail. My throat went dry. She told you to say that. She told me to tell you a great many things, Clifford said quietly. I'll go through them when you arrive. I told Celeste I had a dental appointment in Richmond. She offered to drive me. I said I preferred to go alone and watched something pass briefly behind her eyes. Not suspicion, exactly, more like a small, careful readjustment. She smiled and said, "Of course," and passed me my jacket. Clifford's office was on Merchant Street, a detail Dorothea had always found either ironic or fitting depending on the day. Third floor of a brick building that had stood there since 1887, all dark wood paneling and crowded bookshelves, and the deep, settled smell of a place where serious things had been put to rest for a very long time. His secretary, a woman named Suzette, who had worked alongside him for 30 years, showed me in without a syllable and drew the door shut behind her. Clifford Graydon was 71 years old, trim and silver-haired, with the kind of face that had mastered the art of showing only what it intended to show. He came to his feet when I entered and moved around the desk to take my hand. Both hands the way people reach for a handshake when a handshake needs to carry more than it can. "Gerald." He held my gaze for a moment. "You look like a man who hasn't slept in 2 weeks. 10 days, I said. "Give or take." He almost smiled. "Sit down." He crossed to the credenza behind his desk, dark mahogany built into the wall, and opened the lower cabinet. What he placed on the desk between us stopped my breath entirely. A thick envelope sealed in dark wax the color of old burgundy. Written across the front in handwriting I would have recognized in the dark in a dream at the bottom of the sea. For Gerald to be opened when necessary. Dorothea's handwriting. My hands were moving toward it before I had given them permission. I stopped, pressed my palms flat against my thighs. The burning behind my eyes came on immediate and fierce, and I was not going to come apart in Clifford Graydon's office. I was going to hold the line for 10 more minutes. "When did she give you this?" My voice scraped out rougher than I meant it to, worn down to something barely above a whisper. 8 months before she passed," Clifford said. He settled back into his chair and folded his hands on the desk. "She came in on her own, didn't tell you she was coming, I'd imagine, because you would have insisted on being there. She said she had matters she needed to handle legally, without putting you in the position of having to know about them." His eyes were steady and warm and carrying something very close to grief. "She was the most careful person I ever had the privilege of representing Gerald. She saw things beginning to move long before anyone else registered the motion." I opened the envelope. Inside, a letter in Dorothea's hand, 3 pages, and behind it, a thick legal document, the trust instrument itself stamped and notarized. I read the letter first. My hands were trembling so badly by the second paragraph that the paper gave off a faint rattle in the stillness of the office. "Gerald," she had written. "If Clifford has given you this, then something has unfolded that I prayed would not but could not afford to leave unguarded. I'm sorry I couldn't say this to your face. I tried twice, and both times I looked at you and thought he loves both his sons entirely. I couldn't take that from you before I had no other choice. What I need you to know is this: Brendan has been moving money he was never entitled to touch. He has been constructing something I don't fully understand, but I understand enough to know it was not built with you in mind. I have tried to protect what we built together in the only way I know, with paperwork with Clifford. With a trust written in language that cannot be argued around, saying this belongs to our family and no single person gets to walk off with it. The trust names Cormac as trustee of the foundation, not because I love him more. I want you to hear that clearly, but because he is the one who helped me locate the discrepancies 2 years ago and said nothing to you only because I asked him not to. He has been standing guard for you longer than you know. I love you, Gerald. I have loved you since a faculty dinner in 1971, and not one day of that has ever let up. Whatever comes next, the house is yours. The foundation belongs to the work, and you belong to yourself. Trust Clifford. Trust Cormac. And please take care of the roses." I folded the letter, set it down on the desk, and pressed both fists hard against my mouth until I felt my teeth through my lips. Clifford said nothing. He had the wisdom of someone who had sat across from grief enough times to know that some moments are not made better by filling them with words. When I found my voice again, I said, "The trust. What does it say about Brendan?" Clifford turned the legal document and pointed to a highlighted clause. "If any party attempts to establish guardianship over you through fraudulent medical assessment or takes action to manipulate the disposition of foundation assets without the consent of the named trustee, that party forfeits all inheritance rights, all claims to foundation assets, and all authority within Whitfield Family Holdings." He held my gaze. "Effective immediately upon confirmation of the attempt." I read the clause through twice. Then I looked at Clifford and said, "She built a trap." "She built a trap," he said, "designed so that the only way he could trigger it was by walking directly into it himself." Something shifted behind Clifford's eyes, admiration, and something that looked very much like the private sorrow of a man who had watched a remarkable woman keep working right to the very end. She catalogued everything with precision, every discrepancy, every document she suspected had been altered. All of it sits in the trust file ready to go before the court the moment the time comes. I settled back in my chair. My chest felt at once hollowed out, and overfull, emptied by grief and refilled by something I had not felt since the night in the shed. Not anger, not fear. Certainty. "Clifford," I said, "Brendan is moving toward a guardianship hearing. He has a doctor's evaluation. He has forged documents. He intends to move fast." "I know." Clifford pulled open his desk drawer and set a second document on the table. "Which is why I've already drawn up a petition for emergency injunction. The moment Brendan initiates a formal guardianship proceeding, we file this with the circuit court. It freezes every asset transfer, every account, every foundation transaction before he can shift a single dollar." He paused. "But Gerald, for the injunction to land at the right moment, we need him to commit his move fully on the record." I understood precisely what he meant. We had to let Brendan believe he had already won. "There's one more thing," Clifford said. "At the signing, if there is a signing, I need a signal from you. Something understood only between the two of us, telling me the moment has arrived." He looked at me with steady eyes. "What would Dorothea do?" The answer rose in me immediately, clear, complete, and so entirely her that the sting behind my eyes came back at once. "I'll sign her name," I said, "in place of mine. She'll be in that room one way or another." Clifford held my gaze for a long, quiet moment. Then he gave a very slow nod. I walked out of his office 40 minutes later, down the staircase and through the lobby, and stepped out into the October afternoon. I turned toward the street where I had left my car and stopped. Brendan was standing beside it. He glanced up as I approached, and his expression rearranged itself into surprise, arriving exactly 1 second too late to be real. I understood in that moment that he had not ended up on this street by chance. Someone had been tracking my movements and reporting in. The shadow application on my phone or a person he had positioned nearby. Either way, the message was plain. He was closer than I had allowed myself to believe. Small world Dad. His smile was easy and warm and stopped well short of his eyes. "Didn't know you had appointments up this way." "Dental," I said pleasantly. "You, client meeting." He tilted his head toward the building across the street. Everything all right? You look a little pale." "Just the usual old man business," I said, and rested a hand briefly on his arm and walked around to the driver's side of my car. I didn't look back, but I felt his eyes following me the length of the block. I came home to a kitchen that smelled of cold tea. Celeste was at the table when I walked through the door, not reading, not on her phone, not occupying her hands with any of the small tasks she normally filled them with. Simply sitting, both palms wrapped around a mug she had clearly stopped drinking from long enough ago that all the warmth had left it. She looked up when she heard me come in, and something about her face had shifted. The smile was gone. In 14 months inside this house, Celeste had never once greeted me without that smile. Warm, practiced, calibrated to the precise emotional temperature of whatever room she was entering. In the early months, I had told myself it was simply her nature, a genuinely warm person. I had gone on believing that longer than I had any right to. Tonight the smile was absent, and what lay beneath it was something I had never seen on her face before. She looked worn through and frightened, and underneath both of those things there was something else, something that resembled with unsettling clarity relief. I sat down across from her. I didn't ask if she was all right. I waited. Brendan called me today, she said. Her voice came out flat, the practiced warmth stripped away like a wire from which the casing has been peeled back. He said the doctor's report has been submitted to the court. He said the guardianship filing would go in before the end of the week. She pressed her lips together hard. And then he said that if anything goes wrong, if there are any complications with the process, it's my name on the caregiver documentation, my signature on the medication logs, my face on the security camera footage every morning for 14 months. Her hands tightened around the cold mug. The color had drained from her knuckles. He said it very calmly. She went on, her voice falling to something barely above a breath. That's what frightened me most. Not that he said it the way you mention the weather. I looked at this woman across my kitchen table. This woman who had moved into my home 6 months after Dorothea died and cooked my meals and reminded me every morning to take pills that had been quietly dismantling my ability to think. This woman Brendan had placed in my life like a piece set down on a board. How long have you known what the medication was? I asked. My voice came out steady and quiet, because I had spent the past 10 days teaching myself to keep it that way, regardless of what was happening somewhere deeper inside. Celeste flinched, a small, sharp movement, the way someone flinches who has been bracing for a blow and then feels it arrive anyway. She told me she'd found out 4 months in. He hadn't told her up front what the supplements actually were, just vitamins, he'd said. Something for sleep and mental clarity for a man at your stage of life. She exhaled, her breath catching unevenly. Once she discovered the truth, she began cutting back the doses. She couldn't make them vanish entirely without him noticing, but she could make them smaller. The kitchen air felt suddenly scarce. You reduced the doses, I repeated. I know that's not enough. Her eyes went wet all at once, and she blinked hard against it, pressing her palm flat over her mouth for a beat before letting her hand fall. I know it doesn't undo anything. I know what I've been a part of, and I know there is no version of this where I come out clean. But I need you to understand that I never wanted. Her voice gave out completely on that last word, splintering into something close to a sob that she caught and forced back down with visible effort. He told me nobody would get hurt. He called it paperwork. He said you'd be looked after. Celeste. I leaned forward, both hands flat on the table, not covering hers, just close enough that she could feel I was still there, still present, still willing, despite everything, to keep listening. I need to ask you something, and I need the honest answer. Do you have anything at all from Brendan, messages, emails, recordings, that shows he was directing this? That proves it came from him. She held my gaze for a long moment. Her jaw worked. Her eyes were rimmed red, her breathing still unsteady. Then she reached into the pocket of her robe and placed her phone on the table between us. 3 weeks ago, she said he called to go over the signing timeline. By then, I'd started recording his calls. I didn't know exactly why. Instinct, maybe. Fear. She unlocked the phone and opened a folder I'd never seen buried 3 levels deep inside her photo storage. She said she'd written it down afterward because she needed to see the words in front of her. He had said verbatim, "If this falls apart, Celeste takes the fall. That's always been the deal. You're the wife. Everything you touched, you authorized." I stared at the screen, at the audio file icon, at the timestamp. 3 weeks ago. The same week, Brendan had told me Cormac was too busy to call. My jaw clenched so hard I felt the pressure behind my back teeth. "There are screenshots too," Celeste said, her voice barely above quiet. "Text messages from the original transfer he made to my account, the written instructions about the medication. Most things he preferred not to say aloud." She swallowed. "I kept all of it. I didn't know whether I'd ever use it, but I kept it." I let my breath out slowly through my nose. "I'm going to need you to copy everything onto a drive and get it to Harriet Dunmore, Dorothea's sister. Do you know who she is? The nurse." Celeste gave a short, jerky nod. "Yes." "Can you do it without Brendan finding out?" "Yes." No hesitation at all. I pushed back from the table and she looked up at me with eyes that were still glassy, still frightened, still hauling the weight of 14 months of decisions she had no way of undoing. "Gerald." Her voice came out small, fraying at the edges. "I'm sorry. I know it's not. I know it isn't enough. But I am so sorry." I looked at her for a moment. This woman Dorothea had never known brought into my life by a son. Dorothea had tried so hard to extend love in spite of everything. I turned the question of forgiveness over in my mind, what it actually costs, whether I had any left to spend tonight. "I know," I said, and I meant it. That was the most I could honestly offer her. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the mattress, and stared at Dorothea's side of the bed in the dark. I needed to see Cormac. I hadn't been in the same room as my son in 7 months, and there were things between us that no prepaid phone and no folded letter was built to carry. I just had to find a way to reach him without Brendan seeing it happen. I told Celeste I needed to pick up a prescription refill in Charlottesville. She offered to go for me. I said the drive would do me good, fresh air, a change of scenery, nothing to worry about. She studied my face for just a half-second longer than usual, and I held her gaze with the mild, slightly unfocused expression I'd been practicing for 2 weeks. She nodded and went back to her coffee. I backed out of the driveway at 8:40 and turned onto Maple Street, heading south, both hands on the wheel, the prepaid phone resting on the passenger seat. I had gone exactly 6 blocks when a gray sedan pulled up beside me at the red light on the corner of Maple and Richwood. The passenger window came down. Cormac said, "Follow me," 2 words. His voice was low and steady and carried the particular weight of a man who hadn't slept enough in a very long time. I looked at my son through that open window, and the sight of him hit me somewhere behind the sternum with a force I wasn't remotely prepared for. He was thinner than I remembered. The lines around his eyes had cut deeper. He was wearing a jacket I'd never seen before, and his hair was longer than he'd ever kept it in 42 years. In every outward detail, he looked like a stranger. But his eyes were his eyes. They had always been Dorothea's eyes. I followed him. He led me to an old strip mall on the east side of Lynchburg. Half the storefronts shuttered, the parking lot cracked and hollow on a weekday morning. He pulled in at the far end, away from the road. I swung in alongside him. He climbed out and came around to my passenger door and got in, and for one moment we simply existed together in that space, for the first time in 7 months. The 2 of us breathing the same air in a car in an empty lot, while a thin October wind moved through the bare trees along the perimeter. Then Cormac's face did something I hadn't seen it do since he was a boy. It cracked. Just for a second, a single fracture visible and raw before he pulled it back into place. "Dad." His voice came out rough, scraped down to almost nothing. "I am so sorry. I need you to know that first, before anything else." My throat sealed so completely, I couldn't find a word for a full 3 seconds. I pressed my hand hard over my eyes and breathed through my mouth and told myself, "Not here, not yet, hold on." Then I lowered my hand and looked at my son. "How long?" I asked. My voice came out like gravel. 7 months active," Cormac said. But I had suspicions before that. The foundation discrepancies, I found those first before Garrett Howell did. "Mom asked me not to say anything to you while she was still here. She said she needed time to set things in place legally. She made me promise." His jaw worked. I have hated keeping that promise every single day. Something cracked open in my chest. Not cleanly, not all at once, but in the slow and terrible way of something that has been under pressure far too long. "She asked you to carry that alone. She asked me to carry it for you," Cormac said, and his voice broke on the last word, just slightly, just enough. "She said you had enough to bear already. That she didn't want you spending her last months watching for Brendan instead of watching her." I turned to face the windshield because I could not look at my son's face and hold myself together at the same time. The empty parking lot blurred in front of me. I pressed my back teeth together until the burning behind my eyes pulled back to something survivable. "I believed him," I said. My voice came out hollowed, ashamed, scraped thin. "When Brendan told me you hadn't called because you didn't care, I told myself it wasn't true. But there was a part of me, Cormac, a part of me that let the doubt settle in. I let it sit there. I am so ashamed of that." "Dad." Cormac put his hand on my forearm, the grip of it firm and warm and real in a way that nothing in the past 7 months had come close to, and it nearly undid me completely. "You were being medicated. You were grieving. You were surrounded by people whose entire purpose was to make you question yourself. You are 68 years old, and you held this together, and you worked out most of it on your own." His voice was fierce and low. "Don't you dare apologize for being human." I pressed my fist against my mouth for a moment, breathed, steadied. "Tell me the plan," I said. Cormac straightened. Whatever had opened in him sealed shut again, and the man who had spent 7 months running this operation returned behind his eyes. Sharp, measured, deliberate. Detective Owen Strickland heads the financial crimes unit at the state police. We put the case together, piece by piece. The shell companies, the wire transfers, Priscilla Danforth's role, Terrence Beaumont's forgery work, 3 counts each enough for warrants. He let a beat pass. But the guardianship filing throws the clock off. The moment Brendan submits formally, he gains the ability to request emergency control of your finances while the petition sits in review. We're talking hours, maybe fewer, before he can strip accounts ahead of any injunction. "Which means we need him to act before he files," I said. "We need him fully exposed on record with witnesses present before he sees what's coming." Cormac held my eyes. "That means you have to hand him exactly what he's been starving for. He has to believe down to the bone that the man who built the Whitfield Foundation is gone." I held my son's gaze and said nothing for a moment. Outside, a dead leaf scraped its way across the cracked blacktop. "I can do that," I said. "Dad, understand what you're walking into. He will push hard. Dr. Fenton will be in that room, Terrence will be in that room, and Brendan will be operating from a position of absolute confidence because the finish line is right in front of him. One slip, just one, and it all comes apart." "Cormac." I kept my voice even and steady. For 2 weeks, I have been performing for a camera mounted in my own living room. Every morning, I have sat across from the woman who was putting things into my food and smiled at her like she was doing me a kindness. Every time Brendan called, I answered with warmth I had to manufacture from nothing. I paused. One more performance is not going to break me. Cormac released a slow breath, long, deliberate, weighted with 7 months of things he had been carrying. He put his hand on my forearm and gripped hard, and I laid my hand over his and held it there. When his fingers moved toward the door handle, I said his name. Cormac. He looked back. Your mother understood what she was doing the day she put this in your hands. I need you to know that I see that now. Something behind his eyes went bright and glassy for just a second. He blinked it away, dipped his chin once, and stepped out without another word. I watched the gray sedan go. Then I ran the errand I had promised, pharmacy prescription, the drive home. Brendan phoned at noon. Dad, the signing is set for Saturday at 11. Clifford is welcome to be there if you want a familiar face. Dr. Fenton handles the certification that morning. It's just a formality, your protection, nothing more. Saturday, I answered, letting my voice go a shade slower and a shade thicker than usual, the register I had been building all week. Yes. That sounds fine. I ended the call and sat in the driveway without moving for 60 full seconds. Then I walked inside and let the work begin. Dorothea always said I was the most transparent liar she had ever encountered. Not an accusation, an observation offered with the particular tenderness reserved for someone's most endearing defect. She used to say my face announced the lie before the words reached my lips. After 31 years together, she could read my mood from the angle at which I lifted my coffee cup. That thought was with me Monday morning as I took my place at the breakfast table and watched Celeste lower the small ceramic dish in front of me. It was with me again when the pills went onto my tongue, and I tipped my glass and nestled them against the inside of my cheek and said, "Good morning, sweetheart," in the easy, unguarded tone of a man who had absolutely nothing to conceal. Dorothea, I thought you would have laughed first and coached me second. Monday ran on small betrayals of the self carefully staged. I set my mug down beside the stove rather than at my usual place by the window. Celeste returned it without a word. I used the wrong name, not with any drama, just quietly while her back was turned. Could you pass me that, Dorothea? A half-second gap. Then a small headshake and, sorry, I have no idea why I said that. Celeste turned and what moved across her face was exactly calibrated. A brief, restrained flinch of worry, the look of a conscientious caregiver, noting something that concerns her. She had known from the start of our arrangement that her performance had to hold as surely as mine. Of course, she said, her voice soft and unhurried. It's perfectly all right, Gerald. She gave me what I'd asked for and left it at that. I noticed her set whatever she was holding down with particular care. Brendan came by that evening. He pulled a chair up at the kitchen table, wrapped both hands around a coffee, and wanted to know how the nights were treating me. I told him sleep had become harder to come by. His thumb moved over his phone screen, a quick note, small, practiced, meant to go unnoticed. I had been noticing it since the beginning. He brought up a Tuesday appointment. I failed to recall a meeting I had never booked. I was sure the foundation call was at 2. I said, studying a calendar that bore no such notation. Didn't I put it down? Brendan, who kept appearing daily, now tightening the radius the way a bird of prey works a thermal before it drops, said, "No, Dad. Nothing was scheduled today." His tone was gentle, patient, laced with the specific warmth of a man savoring the sight of his father becoming someone smaller. The rage that rose in me I buried without letting it disturb a single muscle in my face. Wednesday. A glass hit the kitchen floor. The sound brought Celeste in at a run. I stood over the shards, wearing the expression I had rehearsed at the bathroom mirror the night before. Not shock or embarrassment, but a kind of hollow bewilderment, the look of a man whose hands had begun to act without consulting him. Celeste knelt and collected the pieces and offered, "It's fine. It happens." Her voice was so carefully pitched to normal that I could hear the effort underneath it. She was performing too. That was the truth of it now. Two people moving through a kitchen bristling with cameras, each of us playing to a different set of eyes. Thursday morning brought Dr. Fenton back. She arranged herself across from me in the living room portfolio, open Brendan installed on the sofa behind her, the laminated cards spread out as before. My responses came slower this time. Between questions, I let my gaze wander to the window, as though the thread of conversation had drifted just out of my reach. When she produced the clock card, I named it, but I made her wait through 4 full seconds of silence before I did, and I felt Brendan register every one of them from across the room. "Mr. Whitfield," Dr. Fenton said, tilting forward slightly, her voice finding its most careful register. "Can you tell me what day it is?" "The Thursday," I said, and then I let my brow crease as if the word needed checking against something. "I believe it's Thursday. Is that right?" Brendan adjusted his weight on the sofa cushion. The soft tap of his finger on the phone screen reached me across the room. Dr. Fenton's pen moved for longer than the question warranted. She closed the portfolio and rose and said, "Mr. Whitfield, thank you for your time and patience today. My updated assessment will be ready before the close of business." She offered her hand. "You're doing wonderfully." Once she was gone, Brendan came and settled beside me and rested his hand on my shoulder. "Dad." Something rode in his voice, thick, low, that in another life I might have mistaken for love. God help me, it sounded almost real. "My only concern here is keeping you safe. That's the whole of it." I sat with his face in front of me. The face I had studied through every stage of a human life. First steps, first words, the day he learned to drive, the day we buried his mother. That face at Dorothea's graveside, head, bowed fingers laced together, the picture of a grieving son. 38 years I had known that face as my younger boy's. The ache in my chest reached a depth I hadn't known I had, and for one terrible instant I nearly broke, nearly seized his arm, and demanded, "Tell me I'm wrong. Give me an explanation. Show me the son I raised is somewhere underneath all this." But then came Dorothea's letter. Her words, the ones she had taken such care to put down, "Trust what people show you, not what they tell you." Brendan had shown me more than enough. "Thank you, son," I said. It came out warm and faintly tired and completely believable. "I know you have my best interests at heart." He pressed my shoulder once. "Saturday," he said. "Paperwork only. After that, things settle down." "Saturday," I said back, nodding in the unhurried way of a man who has stopped questioning. "All right." He was out the door by 6:00. The instant his tires cleared the end of the driveway, I moved to the kitchen, ran the cold tap, filled a glass, and stood at the sink, drinking it down in one go, both palms flat against the counter edge, needing the resistance of something real and solid. Friday morning, Harriet rang the prepaid phone. "The results are in from the lab." She spoke with the control of someone who had decided before dialing to stay controlled, each word held firmly so it arrived without trembling. "Gerald, 3 compounds came back. One of them is lorazepam, a prescription sedative, a controlled substance, consistent low dosage, the kind that taken day after day over several months would produce precisely the symptoms you described." A pause. Administering a controlled substance to someone without their knowledge or a lawful prescription is a felony in Virginia. This is not a question of civil liability. This is criminal conduct. I stood in the study with the phone pressed hard against my ear, morning light, falling through the blinds in the same thin, pale lines it always made. Everything around me looked exactly as it always had. "I know," I said. "Can you get that report to Clifford Graydon today?" "It's already on its way," Harriet said, then softer, "Gerald, are you ready for tomorrow?" I thought of the empty filing cabinet. I thought of Dorothea's handwriting on the trust envelope. I thought of Cormac's eyes in that parking lot, bright and wet for one unguarded instant. I thought of 51 years spent building something alongside a woman who had loved me carefully enough to go on shielding me from beyond her own death. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." Saturday morning came in gray and quiet. Celeste made eggs I had no appetite for. At 10:45, the first car nosed into the driveway. From the upstairs window, I watched and counted the doors as they opened. Brendan, Terence Beaumont, Dr. Fenton. A fourth person I'd never seen carrying a slim briefcase, a notary public, I would learn later privately retained by Brendan to formalize the signing on the spot. I straightened my collar, took one look in the mirror, and went downstairs to surrender everything so I could reclaim it all. The living room had been rearranged. I saw it the instant my foot left the last step of the staircase. My own furniture in my own house shifted to accommodate a table erected at the center of the room like a piece of stage dressing. 2 chairs positioned across from each other. A third set off to one side. The credenza shoved back against the wall to clear the space. Someone had done all of this while I was still upstairs. Someone had moved through the rooms that Dorothea and I had lived in for 30 years and decided how they ought to be arranged for the purpose of stripping them from me. My jaw clenched behind my placid, mildly unfocused smile. Brendan stood at the window phone in hand and turned when he heard me on the stairs. Trump. The warmth in his voice was flawless. "How are you feeling this morning?" "A little tired," I said. I moved with the same careful deliberateness I'd been practicing all week. Didn't sleep well again. Terence Beaumont occupied the corner with a laptop cables trailing to a portable printer set up on the side table. He glanced up as I came in and gave me a brief professional nod. The nod of a man who sees himself as a technician rather than a conspirator. Dr. Fenton stood near the bookshelf portfolio, already open, pen clipped to the cover. The fourth man, somewhere in his 40s, slim briefcase across his knees, face professionally blank, sat near the window and offered no introduction. Celeste emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of water glasses, which she placed on the table without meeting anyone's eyes. The doorbell sounded at exactly 11:00. Brendan's head swung toward the door with a small, involuntary sharpness that he smoothed over immediately. He had not been expecting it. I had. "I'll get it," I said, mild as milk, and made my way to the door in no particular hurry. Clifford Graydon stepped inside, dressed in his navy suit, his dark leather case in hand, silver hair immaculate. He took my hand in both of his, and in the weight of that grip I heard everything that didn't need saying aloud. "I'm here. We're ready." "Hold on, Gerald," he said, holding my eyes. "Thank you for having me." "You've always been part of this family, Clifford," I said. I heard Brendan come up behind us. "Clifford." His voice was smooth, but something beneath it had gone taut. "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us. Gerald asked me to come." Clifford said, easy and unhurried. "As his attorney of record, I trust that isn't an issue." A beat. "Of course not," Brendan said. "The more the merrier." We all took our seats. Dr. Fenton opened her portfolio and delivered her evaluation summary in the measured cadence of someone who has carefully engineered the language to sound like fact rather than judgment. "Moderate cognitive decline. difficulty with sequential memory, reduced capacity for independent financial decision-making. Her voice carried no inflection. Her conclusions were immaculate. I sat across the table and let my gaze drift once toward the window. The practiced drift of a man whose attention has momentarily been pulled away by nothing in particular. Brendan leaned forward. "Dad, what Dr. Fenton's assessment allows us to do is make the arrangement we discussed official. I'll take over the foundation decisions and manage the property, and you can focus on resting on being comfortable. That's all I'm after here." His voice was soft, so terribly, exquisitely soft. "That sounds fine," I said. "Whatever you think is best, Brendan." The relief that traveled across my son's face in that moment, the shoulders dropping a fraction, the exhale, the easing around his eyes was the most painful thing I had witnessed in 10 days, dense with painful things. He had wanted this for so long. He was almost there. Terence Beaumont sent a document to the printer. It came out with a soft mechanical hum, 2 pages, the guardianship transfer, and the foundation trustee reassignment printed clean and formal. Terence laid them in front of me on the table and placed a pen beside them. Clifford said quietly, "Gerald, would you like me to look these over before you sign?" Brendan's hand shifted slightly on the table. "I don't think we need to slow things down unnecessarily, Clifford." "I think we do," Clifford said, his tone still pleasant, still unhurried, carrying the complete composure of a man with nothing to fear. "Gerald, take as long as you need." I looked down at the documents. My name was printed clearly on the signature line. Gerald Owen Whitfield. I lifted the pen, moved my hand across the paper, and wrote in the careful, deliberate cursive of a 68-year-old man who had learned his penmanship from his mother, Dorothea May Whitfield. The room went completely still. I set the pen down and looked up with the vague, mildly puzzled expression of a man who has just done something he cannot quite account for. Brendan stared at what was on the paper. The color had left his face entirely gone to something like old chalk. "Dad." His voice came out wrong, flattened, airless. That's not your name, isn't it?" I tilted my head in the way I'd rehearsed. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I wrote that." Clifford rose from his chair. He leaned over the table, studied the signature, and then looked at Brendan with an expression of total professional serenity that must have struck my son like a cold hand. "I'm afraid we need to pause," Clifford said. Terence Beaumont bent toward his laptop and stopped, fingers hovering mid-air, face going tight. He pressed a key, then another. He stared at the screen with the particular bewilderment of a man whose instruments have abruptly ceased to obey him. Declan had locked that device remotely at 10:45 that morning from a coffee shop 3 miles away. From somewhere behind me down the hallway, I heard the quiet sound of the back door opening and then closing again. Celeste stepping out for a moment. Stepping outside to hand Harriet a small black USB drive she'd been carrying in the pocket of her cardigan since 8:00 that morning. Clifford reached into his leather case and laid a thick folder on the table. Green heavy. The look of old money and methodical preparation. "Before we go any further," he said in the tone of a man who has been holding these words in reserve for a long time, "I'd like to introduce Dorothea Whitfield's irrevocable trust." Brendan's gaze fell to the folder. Something moved across his face, recognition, and beneath it, the first genuine fracture of fear. Clifford opened the folder, and the room shifted. There is no more precise way to put it. One moment, we were gathered around a table in my living room, Brendan with his rehearsed warmth, Dr. Fenton with her professional composure, Terence Beaumont with his now useless laptop, the anonymous notary with his slim briefcase. Then Clifford placed those first pages on the table, and the very atmosphere of the room seemed to change. As though a window had been opened in a space that had been sealed too long. As though something kept under pressure for a very long time had finally been given room to move. Brendan leaned in. "What is that?" "Dorothea Whitfield's irrevocable trust," Clifford said. He did not look up. He was working through the pages with the unhurried precision of someone who has read this document many times and knows exactly where each part lives. Executed 14 months before her death, witnessed, notarized, and registered with the Circuit Court of Virginia. He found the page he was looking for and laid it flat, turning it so the text faced the room. "I'd like to direct your attention specifically to Clause 7. And then he read it. Every word. His voice was measured and clear, carrying the particular gravity of words that had been selected by a careful woman with deep love and deep foresight. In the event that any party attempts to establish guardianship over Gerald Owen Whitfield through fraudulent medical assessment or takes action to manipulate the disposition of Whitfield Foundation assets without the consent of the named trustee, said party forfeits all inheritance rights, all claims to foundation assets, and all authority within Whitfield family holdings effective immediately upon confirmation of said attempt." Brendan got to his feet. "This is completely irrelevant to," he started, voice rising and sharp. "Please sit down, Brendan." Clifford's tone hadn't shifted by a degree. "This document does not supersede a formal guardianship petition. It doesn't need to supersede it." Clifford turned to the next page. "It takes effect the moment the attempt occurs, which it has. On the record with witnesses present." He looked up at Brendan for the first time, his eyes entirely composed. "Please sit down." Brendan sat. His palms were flat on the table, his jaw working, his eyes gone somewhere dark and calculating, scanning for the exit he had always assumed was waiting. Dr. Fenton had stopped her pretense of note-taking. She sat very still, portfolio shut in her lap, something behind her face gone careful and inward, like a person beginning to tally what the scene unfolding around her is going to cost her personally. Clifford reached into his case again and set a second document on the table. "This is a temporary restraining order signed yesterday afternoon by the Honorable Judge Patricia Harrison of the Virginia Circuit Court." His voice stayed level and unhurried. "It freezes all asset transfers, all foundation account activity, and all transactions associated with BVR Consulting LLC, Roanoke Property Advisors, and Blue Ridge Horizon Partners, effective as of 8:00 this morning." He paused. "Mr. Beaumont, I would advise against attempting any further transmissions from that device." Terence Beaumont looked at Clifford, then at Brendan, then at the door. The door came open from the outside. Detective Owen Strickland, broad-shouldered mid-40s, badge already in plain view on his belt, stepped through the front entrance with two plainclothes officers at his back. He had the quiet, contained manner of someone who has served warrants many times and sees no reason to perform for the room. He took in the scene in one efficient sweep, the way a professional catalogues what needs cataloging. "Mr. Beaumont," he said, "would you come with us, please?" Terence pushed his chair back. All expression had drained from his face, the look of a man who has just discovered that every contingency he planned for has run out. And then Cormac came in through the back of the house. He entered through the kitchen doorway, and I heard him before I saw him, that particular sound of his footfall on the hardwood that I had known since the day he learned to walk. He stopped at the entrance to the living room and looked across the table at his brother. And something passed between them that I have no words for and won't pretend to. Brendan's eyes traveled from Cormac to me, and for one raw, unguarded second, every layer he had constructed over 38 years, every calculation, every performance, every carefully maintained facade of the devoted son came away entirely. What was left underneath was something I recognized: a boy who had always believed he was owed more than he was given. A man who had concluded somewhere along the way that wanting something badly enough made taking it acceptable. My son, my younger son, who had wept at his mother's funeral and meant it even then. Even while planning this, the grief of that arrived so hard and so suddenly that my eyes burned, my throat sealed shut, and I pressed both hands flat against my thighs beneath the table and held myself together through 10 days' worth of accumulated will. "You think this is over, Dad?" Brendan's voice came out stripped and strange, no warmth, no performance left in it, raw at the edges, in a way I had never heard from him before. "You really think a piece of paper from a dead woman stops this?" I looked at my son across the table. My throat ached. My chest ached. Every part of me was aching with a loss that no court order could reach and no injunction could touch. "I know it does," I said. My voice came out quiet and steady and without a trace of doubt. Strickland moved forward. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, and he was looking at Brendan, not at me, because there was only one Mr. Whitfield in that room who needed to hear what was coming. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." Brendan did not look at me again. He stared at the floor while Strickland continued. His hands went behind his back, and that was the last clear image I held of my younger son that morning. I sat at the table in my own living room and did not move. Cormac came and stood beside me and placed his hand on my shoulder, and I reached up and covered it with mine. And the two of us remained like that while the room gradually emptied around us. Through the front window, I watched a car move off down Heathermore Drive with my son inside it. The roses along the front walk were still in bloom. Dorothea had put them in the ground the year we bought the house. The morning after they took Brendan away, my house had the feel of a courtroom that had delivered its verdict, but not yet cleared the gallery. 2 coffee cups still sat on the counter, mine, and Celeste's in precisely the spots where we'd left them before everything changed. The sofa cushions were askew from where Terence Beaumont had shoved past the armrest as the officers moved in. A pen lay on the floor near the fireplace, the same pen Brendan had uncapped with such confidence when he slid those guardianship papers across to me. I picked it up, turned it over between my fingers, then set it on the mantelpiece right beside Dorothea's photograph. "You saw every bit of this coming, didn't you?" I said to her picture, my voice splitting like old timber. "You built the door, you put the key in my hand, and you still had to watch me nearly lose everything before I used it." The ache in my chest went so deep, I had to press one hand flat against it, just to stay on my feet. Cormac arrived at 9:01 that morning, accompanied by Detective Lorraine Covington from the Roanoke Valley Financial Crimes Unit, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who carried a legal pad the way some people carry a weapon. She had worked alongside Detective Strickland on the financial arm of the investigation from the start. Strickland handled the arrests. Covington handled the money. She shook my hand at the door with a firm, direct grip. "Mr. Whitfield, I know yesterday was a great deal to absorb," she said, studying my face. "But we need to go through everything while it's still fresh. Every document, every transaction, every conversation you can recall. I've spent months waiting to have this conversation," I told her, and not a single word of it wavered. We sat at the dining room table for 4 hours. Cormac laid out the thumb drive Garrett Howell had prepared, the deleted emails recovered from the Foundation's server, the shell company registrations, the transfer records. Detective Covington spread the pages across the table the way you'd lay out a map of a crime scene, because that is precisely what it was. "To 3 LLCs, she said, tapping each page in turn. BVR Consulting, Roanoke Property Advisors, Blue Ridge Horizon Partners. None of them conducted any legitimate business activity. Total confirmed transfers $35,000, and that's before we reach the endowment, the $4.2 million. Cormac said, his jaw tight. He hadn't moved it yet. Detective Covington confirmed. The emergency freeze Clifford Graydon filed stopped that transfer with less than 48 hours to spare. I pressed both palms flat on this table to keep my hands from shaking. 48 hours. Dorothea had left me a 48-hour window, and I had nearly been too broken to step through it. What happens now? I asked. Cormac leaned forward. Brendan is looking at elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, and conspiracy charges. Terrence Beaumont goes down for unauthorized surveillance and document forgery. Dr. Fenton will lose her license. The medical board was notified this morning. And Priscilla Danforth. He paused, exhaling hard. Federal wire fraud, 5 to 10. And Celeste. My voice came out softer than I meant it to. Detective Covington glanced at her notes. Cooperating witness, full disclosure, documented from the outset. The DA is recommending a suspended sentence and community service. No prison time. I nodded slowly. I didn't feel the relief I had imagined I would. Mostly I felt the accumulated weight of all those mornings eating breakfast across from her, pretending not to know what she had done, watching her pretend not to know that I knew. She was frightened, I said at last. That doesn't make it right. But she was frightened. Nobody in that room pushed back on that. Adrienne called that afternoon, her voice thick. Declan keeps asking whether Grandpa Gerald is all right, she said. I'm not sure what to tell him. Tell him his grandfather is angry and exhausted and grateful, I said. Tell him all three of those things are true at the same time. She let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for weeks. Gerald, I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I knew something was wrong for months. Adrienne. I cut her off gently, but without any give. You came. That's what matters. She broke down on the other end of the line, great heaving sobs that told me she'd been carrying that guilt like a stone in her chest, far longer than she'd let on. My own eyes went hot. I tightened my grip on the phone. Hey, I said softly. We're going to be all right. I promise you that. That evening, Harriet drove up from Charlottesville and sat with me out on the back porch. The garden had gone quiet. The storage shed door hung slightly open. I hadn't been able to shut it all the way since the night this whole thing began. Dorothea would be furious, Harriet said, wrapping both hands around her mug. Dorothea would be satisfied, I told her. She planned for this, every last piece of it. Harriet looked at me with eyes that shone and a smile that couldn't quite hold steady at the corners. She loved you in the most practical way I have ever seen one person love another. I looked out at the garden at the rose bushes Dorothea had put in the ground the spring before she got sick. Bare now in the autumn cold, but rooted deep and holding. I know, I said, and for the first time in months, those words came out without trembling. I know she did. March arrived quietly the way it always does in Virginia, not with warmth, but with the faint suggestion of it. The frost had started retreating from the garden's edges, and the rose bushes Dorothea had planted along the south fence were pushing out their first pale green buds, slow, stubborn, and entirely sure of themselves. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and watched those buds the way you watch something you've earned the right to see. 4 months had gone by since the evening Cormac's sedan had pulled up beside me in that empty Lynchburg parking lot and turned the whole thing around. 4 months since the documents were set on the table, the trap was sprung, and my son was walked out of this house in handcuffs. 4 months, and I still hadn't worked out how to hold all of it at once. The sentencing hearings wrapped up in late February. Clifford Graydon drove me to the Roanoke courthouse himself. I hadn't asked him to, but I was deeply thankful for it when I found myself gripping the door handle hard enough that my knuckles whitened. "You don't have to go in," Clifford said from the driver's seat, watching me carefully. "Yes, I do," I told him. My voice came out rougher than I'd meant it to. "I've been waiting 68 years to understand that boy. I'm not missing my last chance to look at him." Clifford pressed his lips together and gave a short nod. "Then let's go." The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Brendan stood in a charcoal suit that hung slightly too large. He'd lost weight in 4 months. His jaw sharper, his eyes carrying something I hadn't seen in them since he was very young. Not quite remorse. Something closer to exhaustion. The judge read the term 7 years in a state correctional facility, eligible for parole review after 4. The federal wire fraud charges had been folded into a consolidated sentence, Clifford explained afterward, which kept jurisdiction at the state level. Brendan's attorney gave a mechanical nod. The court clerk's pen moved across the page. Then Brendan turned and found my face in the gallery. I didn't look away. I held my eyes on him steady, direct, and let him see everything I was feeling because I was finished performing for anyone in that family. His chin trembled. His jaw locked as he fought to contain it. And then very quietly, his shoulders dropped the way a man's do when he finally sets down something he has carried too long. "Dad," he mouthed. Just the one word. Nothing more. My throat sealed so fast it burned. My eyes filled until this courtroom dissolved at its edges. I pressed one fist against my chest and breathed through it, slow, deliberate, because I was not going to come apart inside a courthouse. But God, it hurt. It hurt in a way I had not braced for. Not the anger, not the sense of betrayal, but the grief of watching my own son become someone unrecognizable, and the knowledge that I might never fully understand when that had happened. Terrence Beaumont received 4 years. Dr. Iris Fenton surrendered her medical license and faced a civil suit from 3 other families whose evaluations she had manipulated. Priscilla Danforth was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $612,000. Celeste completed her community service, gathered her belongings in silence, and left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter that read, "Only I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner." I kept the note. I'm not entirely sure why. I simply couldn't bring myself to throw it away. On a Saturday in early March, Declan came over with a lawn mower he'd borrowed from Adrienne's neighbor. He was 16 years old and absolutely set on doing something of practical use, which is one of the finest qualities a person can possess. "You don't have to do that," I told him from the porch steps. He looked up at me, squinting into the thin winter light, and broke into a wide, uncomplicated grin that cracked something open in my chest in the best possible way. "Grandpa Gerald," he said, "the grass isn't going to mow itself." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that rises from somewhere deep and catches you by surprise. The kind I hadn't heard from myself in so long it felt like running into an old friend on the street. "No," I agreed, lowering myself to the top step. "I suppose it isn't." I watched him work as the thin March sun tracked slowly across the yard, and somewhere inside the house behind me, the old clock on the mantelpiece ticked steadily forward the way it always had, the way Dorothea had wound it every Sunday morning, without fail for 31 years. Later that evening, I settled into her armchair with the lamp on and her photograph in my hands. "The court gave me back the house," I told her. "The foundation accounts are unfrozen. Clifford says the estate is intact." I ran my thumb along the edge of the frame. But you already knew all of that would happen, didn't you? You planned it down to the final signature. Outside, wind moved through the garden, and the rose bushes swayed bare branches, catching the last of the light roots, pressing firm in the cold ground. The court could give back everything they had taken from me, I said quietly, my voice going thick. But it couldn't return the year I spent frightened inside my own home. It couldn't restore the mornings I sat across from Brendan and pretended not to know. It couldn't hand back what it felt like to watch my son look at me and see nothing but an asset. I set her photograph down gently on the side table. But I'm still here, Dorothea. The house is still standing. And those roses you put in the ground, they're coming back. I pressed my hand flat over my heart and held it there. So am I. There is something I took away from all of this. Something I could not have said aloud on that September night when I crouched inside the garden shed with my heart hammering and my hands unsteady, listening to my own son move through my house as though it already belonged to him. What I learned is this: the people who wound us deepest are rarely strangers. They are the ones who know exactly which door to walk through because we handed them the key. I was a father who loved both his sons without reservation, and I was a father who had stopped watching carefully enough, who mistook presence for loyalty and silence for peace. Do not make that mistake. If something in your home feels wrong, trust that feeling sooner than I did. Ask the hard questions before someone else forces them upon you. I believe this too, and I say it as a man who has sat with a great deal of regret. You cannot prevent betrayal entirely, but you can build your life on something solid enough that when it comes, it does not take everything down with it. Dorothea built that for me. She did it without fanfare, without ever asking to be credited for it, out of a love I am only now beginning to fully comprehend. In the end, I was given back more than I had any right to expect: a son who never stopped standing watch over me, a grandson who showed up with a lawnmower and no explanation needed, and a house that is still standing. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already understand why this story was so hard to tell and why I felt it had to be told. I spent a long time after all of it asking myself how I had missed so much for so long. The truth is, I believe God allowed me to reach the edge of losing everything so I could finally see what had always been holding me up. Dorothea. Her quiet love. The trust she built in the dark without asking for a single word of credit. What that cost her and what it saved is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Here is what I want to leave with you. Pay attention to the small wrongnesses. A feeling in your gut that something is off inside your own home is not paranoia. It is information. Trust it earlier than I did. Love is not the same as loyalty. Make sure the people around you have shown you both, not just told you. If you are getting older and someone begins making decisions about your life without asking, that is not care. Speak up. Ask questions. Bring someone you trust into the room, and build on solid ground while you still can. A will, a trust, a conversation with your family about your wishes. These are acts of love, not morbid ones. Dorothea's paperwork saved everything. Yours might too. If this story moved you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. A parent, a sibling, anyone who might be facing something they don't have the words for yet. Leave me a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Father's Silent Revenge so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to stay until the end. I'll see you in the next one.